General principles. The Ninth Age, Fantasy Battles is a turn-based game. A standard game lasts for 6 game turns, each divided into 2-player turns. At the start of the game, one player has the first player turn, in which they use their units to perform various actions, such as moving, casting spells, or charging, while their opponent gets to react. After this, the other player has their first player turn. When this comes to an end, game turn 1 is complete. In game turn 2, the first player now has their second player turn, and so on, until both players have completed 6 player turns. This marks the end of the game. Player turn. Each player turn is divided into 5 phases, performed in the following order: charge phase, movement phase, magic phase, shooting phase, melee phase, active and reactive player. The active player is the player whose player turn it currently is. The reactive player is the player whose player turn it currently is not. Simultaneous effects. Whenever 2 or more effects occur at the same time, resolve effects controlled by the active player first. If there is a choice involved, such as abilities that may or may not be activated, the active player must declare the use of their abilities before the reactive player. Each player is free to decide in which order they resolve their own simultaneous abilities. Once both players have declared the use and order of their abilities, resolve their effects, starting with those of the active player. Until the first player completes their normal deployment in the deployment phase, consider the player who chose their deployment zone to be the active player. During the rest of the deployment phase, consider the player who completed their normal deployment first to be the active player. For example, if both players have abilities that may be activated at the start of the magic phase, the player whose magic phase it is must choose first whether or not they are using their abilities and in which order. Then the reactive player may choose to use their abilities or not. After that, the effects of the abilities from both sides are resolved, starting with the active player's abilities. The terms friendly and enemy. The rules often refer to a friendly or enemy player turn, friendly or enemy models, friendly or enemy units, etc. In this context, the term enemy refers to your opponent's player turns, models, units, etc., while friendly refers to yours. One use only. These effects can only be used once per game. Dice. Rolling dice. In the Ninth Age, Fantasy Battles, dice are often used to determine random outcomes. The most commonly used type is the 6-sided dice, referred to as a d6, with a range from 1 to 6. The effects of a dice roll are often dependent on whether the rolled value is equal to or higher than a set value, such as a dice roll that is successful if the dice rolls 3 or higher. This is often referred to as a 3+ or 2+, a 4+, 6+, etc. Multiple dice. Sometimes you need to roll more than one of these dice at the same time. This is represented by a number before the type of dice rolled, such as 3d6, which means to roll 3 6-sided dice and add the results together. Modified dice rolls. On other occasions, a dice roll may be modified by adding or subtracting a number, such as d6 plus 1. In such cases, simply add the relevant number to, or subtract it from, the result of the roll. It may also be multiplied by a number, such as d6 times 2, multiply the result of the roll by this number. Natural roll. A natural roll on a d6 refers to the value of the dice, before any modifiers are applied. Rerolling dice. Lastly, some effects in the game call for rerolling certain dice, such as failed to wound rolls or Aegis save rolls of 1. When you encounter such situations, reroll the relevant dice. Dice can only be rerolled once. The second result is final, no matter the cause, source, or result, and the initial result is ignored for all rules purposes unless specifically stated otherwise. Note that rerolling a dice is not considered a modifier. Rolling a d3. The game sometimes requires the roll of a d3. This is performed by rolling a d6 and then having the result, rounding up, so that the result can only be 1, 2, or 3. If the game requires a natural 1 or a natural 6, when rolling a d3, it always refers to the value of the d6 before having Maximized roll and minimized roll. For dice rolls subject to maximized roll, roll one additional d6 and discard the lowest d6 rolled. For dice rolls subject to minimized roll, roll one additional d6 and discard the highest d6 rolled. These rules are cumulative. For example, for a roll affected by 2 instances of maximized roll, you roll 2 additional d6 and discard the 2 lowest d6 rolled. The results of the discarded d6 are ignored for all intents and purposes. The direction dice and random directions. The direction dice is a special 6-sided dice with all sides marked with an arrow. Certain rules may ask the player to determine a random direction. In such cases, roll the direction dice and then use the direction in which the arrow points, representing the direction dice with a standard d6. Alternatively, the direction dice can be represented by rolling a standard 6-sided dice and using the side with a single pip, for example, the 1, to represent the direction of an arrow as depicted in Figure 1. If rolling a result of 1 or 6, 1 and 6 are on opposite faces on a standard dice, use the central pip in the 5 to represent the direction of the arrow instead. Figure 1, representing the direction dice with a standard d6.